Make up mine. Fight.
If there's one understated thing I respect a lot about Team Fortress 2, it's that the game does a great job balancing its silly and serious gameplay elements. More so than pretty much any other FPS, TF2 features a lot of dedicated, by design, goofy weapons and playstyles, but they don't distract from its more serious balance or gameplay. Some of these, like the loose cannon and Beggar's Bazooka, obviously skew a bit on the unserious side, yet can also comfortably carry a team with enough knowledge and skill. Others, like Trollger and Demo Knight, are definitely a bit more map and game state dependent, yet can still be totally effective in the right hands. However, there does exist a small subset of quote-unquote goofy TF2 weapons that even the most dedicated of silly-pilled players would never consider using. These weapons, which I'm electing to call throw meme weapons, are interesting in that they were explicitly designed by Valve to be just that, but also boast a unique lack of either a fun or use factor. They pose to provide a laid-back, fun experience, yet only deliver crushing disappointment and an assured wasted slot on your team. In this video, I want to talk about them. Weapons so bad that even the righteous Bison is too good for them. That said, let's roll. But before we begin, I do just want to mention one more time that I am now an official partner of G Fuel Energy. G Fuel is a sugar-free energy drink available in over 50 flavors, and if there is anything I like aside from the Heavy and Team Fortress 2, it's definitely fruit-flavored energy drinks. Partnering with G Fuel has been a dream come true. I have been a fan of them for quite some time before the partnership, and their products have definitely helped me up my focus and concentration levels at work, on the computer, and in-game. So if you'd like to save some money on G Fuel this holiday season, hop on over to the link in the description and use code TLOPAL at checkout to save 20% on your order. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy.
Gary! There's a bomb strapped to my chest! It's gonna explode in 3 seconds unless you take a bath!
We're going to be starting this video out with the Ullapool K-Bird, not only because it pretty effectively embodies the design mentality we'll be seeing throughout the entire thing, but also because it's probably the best weapon we'll be discussing. Yeah, would you believe that this is the peak of the mountain for this discussion? And it sucks too, because in terms of concept and presentation, I've got no complaints with this thing. A throwable stick grenade that Demo Man instead hits people with is not only a very on-brand and in-character concept for him, but it also just suits the game's overall vibe and sense of humor extremely well. I love seeing firearms and history experts reacting to TF2 weapons always have horrified responses to this thing. As far as its design goes, no notes, but ideas only go so far, and gameplay is what determines a weapon's worth. And unfortunately, the Ullapool K-Bird isn't worth much. The Ullapool K-Bird is an unlockable melee weapon for Demo Man, a stick grenade with a long handle. This weapon acts as a close quarters melee weapon that deals both melee and explosive damage independently. In theory, this results in a weapon that can hypothetically one-shot light classes and act as a potent surprise tool. In practice though, it's not great. Not only does it boast a slower deploy speed, a swing speed penalty, and even an unlisted damage penalty on its melee attack, but it also features ramp up on its explosive, meaning that, combined with the game's generally unreliable melee hit reg, it can very often fail to kill even the squishiest of classes in a single swing. It also deals self-damage to the demo and blasts him into the sky for guaranteed fall damage on each hit. Lastly, it only explodes once per life, with it being left as a slow, weak stump until the player either dies or returns to a resupply cabinet after each use. If I had to use one word to describe using the Ullapool K-Bird, aside from bad, it'd be committal. Despite the appealing prospect of whipping out a 120 plus damage death stick and blindsiding some overly aggressive player with it, the act of actually doing this is alarmingly clumsy and requires a lot of in-the-moment investment. Not only does the slower deploy speed and slower swing speed make actually pulling this weapon out and hitting an enemy with it in the moment incredibly sluggish, but the guaranteed self-damage and self-displacement makes it all but assured that you'll be reeling after each use. And that's not even mentioning needing to either die or run back to spawn to get another use of its explosive, which is a really neat little bow on this unwanted package. Chandler Bing would be shaking in his boots at this level of commitment. And all of this required investment and sacrifice for what? A single big hit. A big hit that's not even guaranteed to one-shot a light class. Due to the generally unreliable nature of melee hit reg and the cloudy at best range of this weapon's explosive ramp up, it's entirely possible, more likely than not actually, to bash a scout, sniper, spy, or engineer with this weapon and leave them with just enough HP to counterattack. And guess what? Because of the slower swing speed, you can't immediately follow up for the kill even with the weakened stump. Imagine being a weapon that's entire existence is defined by single-use enormous burst damage, but still needing 2 hits or the same as any other melee weapon to kill a light class. Couldn't be me. I realize that this weapon's current design is primarily because competitive medics complained about being one-shot by it, but it's like, I'd rather a fringe novelty that can one-shot once per life than a completely useless gimmick take up a slot in the game's weapon lineup. I'm sorry if that's a controversial statement. Oh, and also, fun fact, aside from being incredibly sluggish, clumsy, and overly committal, it's also extraordinarily buggy. For a weapon that's core conceit is big hit, this thing barely works for some reason. It has enough bugs to fill its own Oogie Boogie. Or Riku, I don't know.
Mickey! It's Riku! They put bugs in him!
What?
Among its known bugs are frequent issues where it'll fail to deal one or both of its types of damage, still exploding on an unregistered melee hit, visually appearing either exploded or not regardless of its actual gameplay status, and most importantly, not mini-critting with Demo Man's shield. This includes the Tide Turner's guaranteed mini-crit, which means that this weapon does not get a damage bonus at all when using the Tide Turner. This is genuinely a failing on every level of melee weapon design in TF2. How is a weapon that's one core use is to deal a lot of damage once per life barely capable of doing that on a good day? All of these aspects combined result in the Ullapool Caber being one of the least fun weapons to use in the game for me. It's just so clumsy, inconsistent, unreliable, and any attempt to whip it out in a fight just ultimately ends up feeling like a multi-layered gamble that could go sideways at any moment. There are so many things that can go wrong using the Caber, and surprisingly few of them have anything to do with using a grenade as a melee weapon. This weapon fails on so many technical and execution levels that it's genuinely surprised that it's allowed to exist in the game in its current state. It genuinely feels as though Valve hates this weapon and have tried everything in their power to disincentivize people from using it without straight up removing content from the game. But I do still think that this is the best weapon we're discussing in this video. Out of everything we'll be talking about, this weapon has the closest approximation to a salvageable design and concept. It does have a few small legitimate use cases, and that's more than any of the other weapons we'll discuss in this video can say. Let's talk about them. I want to stress that most of these use cases are better performed by other demo melees and are not exclusive to this weapon, but they're still use cases all the same. For one, this weapon's pretty effective at cleaning up low health enemies. In situations where you or a teammate have done substantial damage to someone and they're fleeing on death's door, a quick charge into a caber hit can be the perfect overkill type of kill confirm. It's oftentimes a suicide mission, or at the very least extremely dangerous, but in the face of especially important picks like medics, sometimes the good old you stay, I go is necessary. This is especially handy in the face of an enemy who knows how to dodge or play around your pipes. Even if they can dodge your ranged attacks, they can't dodge a charging screaming Scotsman with an explosive in hand and nothing to lose. In addition, the Caber works really well as a cleanup combo type of tool for singular enemies. If you're not confident or consistent in your ability to secure a kill with pipes, landing a single one and then cleaning up the enemy with a Caber hit can be a really effective linchpin in a battle. It's all about the surprise element. Enemies generally don't expect you to whip out a Caber and instant kill them, so when you can make it happen, it can be a very strong knowledge check on your enemies. Especially on the flank, you can kill the fuck out of someone before they can begin to react. Lastly, and I want to stress that this is an extremely niche use case, but you can use the Caber for movement in a pinch. If you don't bring stickies to jump with, then blasting the wall or the ground with a Caber swing can give you just the boost you need for a one-time escape or flank. It's important to note that this does huge self-damage and can only be done once per life, on top of also consuming your Caber use for that life, so I wouldn't recommend doing it willy-nilly, but it is still something you can do. And that's pretty much it. Again, the Caber is a disappointing weapon due to the sheer simplicity of its concept contrasted against the game's seeming lack of an ability to deliver on it. I have no idea what it is about this weapon that made it so difficult for Valve to consistently make it work, but its distinctive jank, committal nature, and lack of grace, combined with its plethora of weapon-killing bugs, really result in a weapon that is just not fun. I can understand the silly appeal of its concept, running in and blasting you and your enemy sky high, but in practice, it's just so sloppy. Why would you ever risk this weapon not working and getting you killed when you have pipes that work infinitely better, or a more consistent and rewarding melee option just a few clicks away? Using the Ullapool Caber never feels like it's working. It just feels like you're coasting along. And for what's effectively a bomb on a stick, it really shouldn't be that difficult. It's a funny, appealing weapon, yet one that the game simply couldn't capitalize on the comedic potential of.
Bobby, what are you doing? Don't insult a man's steak without tasting it. You'll get us killed.
Next up is what I earnestly believe may be the single worst weapon in TF2. Look guys, I know I've made fun of a lot of weapons on this channel, and every time I do, at least one person comes out of the woodwork to defend it and provide some use cases that it can be good in. That's just the nature of TF2, everything has a niche. But if any fucking clowns are gonna go into my comments and tell me that the buffalo steak sandwich is actually really good and underrated in your main heavy secondary, then I will assume by default that you're baiting a reaction and disregard your comment. This is a truly awful weapon, and one that completely unambiguously lacks a use case or genuine applicable niche. It's a food item for heavy that does not heal, does not provide a meaningful buff, and actively takes abilities away from your class. This is a throw weapon in its purest form. Let's talk about it. The buffalo steak sandwich is an unlockable secondary weapon for heavy. A consumable food item, this time being a large cartoonish ribeye steak, this weapon can be eaten by pressing mouse 1 or taunting while it's active. Upon consumption, the heavy is not healed for any amount of health, and he instead enters a temporary rage state for 16 seconds. During this time, his move speed is increased by 30%, and all of his attacks mini-crit. As a few trade-offs for these incredibly strong buffs, during the buff period, heavy is locked into using only his melee weapon, and as an unlisted negative, he takes 20% more damage from all sources. This means that eating the buffalo steak strong arms the heavy into a glass cannon rushdown melee fighter playstyle who runs faster and deals 88 damage per punch, on a class who otherwise outputs the highest close range sustained damage in the game. So yeah, I'm just gonna be totally transparent and just fully lay my balls on the table here. The buffalo steak is genuinely terrible. I'm sorry, I know this weapon has its fans, but I am a heavy main, so I tend to scrutinize weapons for this class a bit more than I would any other class. There is no general purpose situation where you'll be benefiting you or your team by equipping and consuming this weapon. It is purely a self-debuff disguising as a buff that exists solely for funny epic haha meme play. Haha epic funny meme play that in practice is neither epic nor funny. This is an interesting weapon as it appears to be transparently designed with this intention without any inclination towards it being anything more than a throw meme weapon, and that's just kinda silly to me. For starters, you might think that the speed boost may have legitimate utility as a rollout tool. Fun fact, I actually made a now long deleted video about this in about 2018, and documented that the buffalo steak rollout is actually significantly worse than using something like the gloves of running urgently, purely due to the eating animation. It's true that the fast gloves and buffalo steak both buff heavy's movement speed by 30% or the same amount, but the guaranteed 4-second eating animation causes the steak to have a built-in delay on its speed boost, and puts you behind the fast gloves by a significant margin 9 times out of 10. That one time where it doesn't is really only useful if you eat it at the very beginning of a match, during the countdown period in which classes can't move but can still fire their weapons, and even then, that's a lot of setup for a one-time move speed buff, and the fact that you'll have to equip this weapon beforehand and then unequip it afterwards kind of counteracts that. To be fair though, that's obviously a more consequential use case rather than an explicitly intended one, as the buffalo steak's primary use should be very clear: turn heavy into a potent rushdown melee fighter. This is funny in theory, as rushing at people and punching them with what's otherwise the slowest class in the game definitely does have some charm, but in practice, you're really only handicapping yourself. For one, a mini-crit attack with any of Heavy's gloves except the Warrior Spirit, which despite the item bonus, you do not want to be comboing with this thing, only deals 88 damage. So on everything except an unbuffed Kunai Spy, you'll still need at least 2 punches to kill any class. Compare this to non-mini-crit punches, which also take at least 2 punches. Let the good times roll. While this does mean that you're now killing medics in only 2 punches as opposed to 3, there is a large drum-fed elephant in the room that bears mentioning in this discussion. Yeah, Heavy does the highest close range sustained damage in the game, and it's not even close. While you can get out 88 damage a second with each punch using the buffalo steak, you can just as easily get out over 500 in that same second using Heavy's minigun, while also carrying a secondary that actually does something, and not strong-arming yourself into a glass cannon playstyle. Want to know why most games don't make their tanks glass cannons? Because tanks are kind of meant to be tanky. The buffalo steak takes away Heavy's primary role and niche on the battlefield as a damage soaking and dealing team anchor in exchange for a playstyle that he is not suited for. And what's really fucked up is that the buffalo steak actively nerfs you while you use it on top of this. You take an additional 20% damage from all sources while this item's in effect, which funnily enough is not listed anywhere in its tooltip yet absolutely exists. I genuinely have no idea why Valve thought this was at all necessary or required to balance this thing, as a Heavy running at you with his melee who cannot heal himself or pull out his primary is already pretty easy to kill. It just kinda strikes me as an extreme case of insecure overbalancing, Valve's paranoid belief that someone somewhere would have found a way to make this weapon broken without it, but I'll be honest, Chief, I don't really see that happening. If you want to equip the Buffalo Stake, it should always come with the conditional understanding that it is a self-owned to do so. Nobody should ever operate under the misguided belief that they're helping themselves or their team by using this thing. By taking away Heavy's minigun, his ability to self-heal, his ability to deal range damage, and his ability to tank all at once in exchange for slightly stronger melee attacks, you are fundamentally throwing away your primary team utility as Heavy. This weapon should only ever be used in the presence of another Heavy or team tank who is doing their job properly. But you know what, I try to be fair in these videos, so let's talk about how to best use the Buffalo Stake in casual from my experience if you really feel like ruining you and your team's experience. The first thing to consider is which melee weapon to bring, which I find to be the Fists of Steel. While this does make it so you're basically instantly turned to vapor by melee attacks, it leaves you with a net 20% resistance to ranged attacks and can help you last longer as you attempt to close the distance on someone for a punch. Otherwise, you should eat the Buffalo Stake around the corner from a fight and use the third-person camera to peer around and gauge whether or not there's a target worth aggressing on. In the presence of 2 or more enemies, let them come to you for an ambush, or otherwise attack a singular enemy aggressively. I'll be real with you though, anytime you use the Buffalo Stake and run at an enemy, there's like a 90% chance that you'll secure a kill or 2 and then immediately die. You're basically running at enemies taking more damage with only linear single target attacks to defend yourself, and even if you survive the entire effect duration, you'd likely have taken a lot of damage and significantly overextended along the way. Just operate under the goal of getting some good hits in before you inevitably die, rather than attempting to steamroll an entire team. You'll be much better off that way. Also, you can still throw this item to heal teammates, but that just raises further questions about why Heavy himself can't heal with it. And honestly, that's why the Buffalo Stake pisses me off so much. It pretends it's providing a meaningful buff and alternative playstyle, a real charge and charge for Heavy, but in reality, it's strictly a negative self-debuff that completely lacks a legitimate positive use case. Anytime you eat the Buffalo Stake and start swinging, you could have just as easily killed your enemies with your minigun and had health or an actually useful lunchbox item to spare. My big idea for this weapon is really just to give it self-healing on hit or kill, that way Heavy could stay in the fight longer and wouldn't be immediately running to his death anytime he used it. This did used to be a stat on the Warrior Spirit, but I think migrating it to this weapon would be pretty cool. Fun fact, this item was originally meant to be a peyote cactus, but this design was scrapped due to it being deemed potentially offensive. A fair change to make, but maybe needing to redesign the entire thing visually was an omen to just redesign the entire weapon. This might be the single worst weapon in the game in its current state, and one that I don't think any serious Heavy player is ever well off using. But hey, at least it knows it's bad.
Started talking shit, wouldn't you know? I reached back like a pimp and I slapped the hoe.
And lastly, we have Pyro's iconic hand, alternatively known as the Slap Attack or the Hot Hand. It's a noteworthy weapon because it was added in Team Fortress 2's as of right now last significant major update. But hey, we just got that 64-bit thing, so anything could change these days. Jungle Inferno's weapon pool was polarizing to say the least, with the Dragon's Fury, Thermal Thruster, and Second Banana generally being pretty well liked, yet the Gas Passer and especially Hot Hand generally not being. Valve adding a weapon like the Hot Hand, which is pretty transparently designed to be a silly, unviable goof weapon, as late into the game as 2017, it feels like a pretty visible attempt to appeal to that ever-growing goofy side of the TF2 community in what was otherwise a very earnest, balance-oriented update. And considering that people thought the Hot Hand was funny for about a week and then swiftly forgot about it, I think we all know how well that appeal went. The Hot Hand is an unlockable melee weapon for Pyro, a long, soot-stained fireman's glove. The Hot Hand boasts a relatively simple stat lineup, all things considered. By pressing mouse 1, the Pyro will throw out 2 consecutive slaps, each dealing 28 damage for a total of 56. This gives it a net 14% less damage than stock, though its tooltip incorrectly lists it as 20%. Each hit with the Hot Hand will grant the Pyro a brief 1-second move speed bonus, the same type granted by the Big Earner and Whip, and will display each individual slap in the kill feed, with kills being double highlighted, not unlike the Holy Mackerel or Unarmed Combat. This is mostly cosmetic, though some very annoying and insistent TF2 players will dedicate their lives to reminding you that it does technically expose Dead Ringer spies, and is a net positive as a result. These same people get bullied at school. So right out of the gate, the Hot Hand's nature as a weapon should be entirely clear. It is wholly, transparently, and purely intended to be a funny, pestering meme weapon that's explicitly designed to annoy people on the server. Its lower damage results in more slaps before death, and more slaps means more notifications in the kill feed, and also more funny slap sound effects. This is a weapon that exists purely to butter the biscuits of dedicated silly TF2 TF2 players who like to engage in alternative strategies and generally be nuisances to whatever groups they're playing in. I want to stress, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this. Video games are meant to be fun and not taken deathly seriously, and TF2 is really well suited to weapon ideas like this, but I do want to try and earnestly evaluate the hot hand compared to Pyro's other contemporary options. TLDR, it's not great. First of all, the fact that Valve decided to dedicate one of the 5 unlockable weapon slots in what we didn't know at the time would be TF2's last significant major content update for quite some time to a deliberately unviable meme weapon is definitely a choice. I honestly do kind of think the hot hand is pretty funny, the act of bitch slapping an enemy to death and all, but it does beg the question if this specific design was really worth the dedicated balance effort and programming. I'm not one to cry about wasted slots, since I do know enough about game dev to realize that the alternative to the hot hand would have likely been no 5th weapon in the update at all, but I guess Valve really does know their audience. As for the actual gameplay, the hot hand is pretty much dead on arrival. While it is very funny and charming, its net lower DPS on a class who already specializes in close range damage with their primary and has a very competitive melee slot does not really impress. You know everything bad that we all say about the stock fire axe and the 3rd degree and the sharpened volcano fragment? Yeah, that, but for a funny slap club this time instead. There's really no practical reason to whip out the hot hand and attempt to slap someone with it, as outside of dedicated throwing and memeing, Pyro is infinitely better off just running people over with their flamethrower or using a much better melee utility. Pyro has very little use for an on-hit effect type of melee, unless it's a very potent on-hit effect like in the case of the Extinguisher. When it comes to that on-hit effect, it's the only real tangible bonus this weapon has. A small burst of movement speed on hit is genuinely effective as a means to help stick to enemies to keep the pressure on them, but the incredibly brief length of the speed boost and committal nature of landing a single slap means that you won't be using it for much else. It doesn't last long enough to have the flexibility of something like the Big Earner or Disciplinary Action, and is mostly relegated to enabling you to keep the pressure on enemies for more slaps. You're not going to be hot hand speed boosting your way into a really fancy rollout or anything. And of course, we have the kill feed effects. Every slap you land on someone with the hot hand will be displayed in the kill feed for all to see, with a kill being double highlighted for extra humiliation. This is mostly cosmetic, but as much as it does pain me to say it, it does have a legitimately niche use case. It can expose dead ringer spies, as upon activating his ringer, it'll count as a normal slap rather than a slap kill. The thing is, I find this to be exceptionally niche. A spy really has no reason to proc his ringer in the face of a hot hand Pyro. He can easily trick stab or just out damage with his revolver, and honestly, how many times has this actually helped you? No, seriously, I want you guys to tell me, no lies, if you've ever experienced more than 1 or 2 occasions in the 7 years since this item released where exposing a disguised spy with the hot hand actually had a significant tangible impact on the match. It really strikes me as just something that can happen rather than something that actually does happen. And would you believe me if I told you that that's all there is to talk about with the hot hand? No, seriously, apart from being exceptionally buggy, which is a common thread among Jungle Inferno weapons, there's really not much else to mention. The hot hand really is a what you see is what you get kind of TF2 weapon. Do you like the thought of deliberately playing suboptimally yet slapping people to death? If the answer is yes, then you'll probably like the hot hand. However, I think the fact that you barely see people running this thing, even compared to other silly meme weapons, is a real testament to the fact that TF2 fans simply didn't latch on to this specific brand of humor. It's a charming weapon, yet one that lags behind its alternatives both as a pyro weapon and as a silly meme weapon. And that's the video. I think that these 3 weapons speak to a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes a community-accepted, funny meme playstyle in TF2. Notice how all 3 of these weapons were explicitly designed from the outset to be funny. Also note how all 3 of them are generally disliked and not often used. You cannot design an aspect of a game to be funny or a meme. You can't manufacture something like this. People will latch on to things that they think are funny because oftentimes the humor is unintended or consequential of a playstyle found by the player base. If you put a weapon in the game and tell people that it's funny by design, then there's no experimentation or community camaraderie in finding the humor in it. It's a very silence brand, how do you do fellow kids type of design, and one that I think TF2 would be better off without. People like Demo Knight and Trollger and the Beggars because they found that those weapons could be funny, not that Valve told them they were. TLDR, it's the community that decides what's a meme or an in-joke. You can't force it. Regardless, thanks, hope y'all have a fantastic day before, during, and after watching, and I'll catch y'all later. Cheers!
Oh, there's
Another medic!
coming. Another medic!
That was a genuine surprise. That was a turn in the story I wasn't expecting, and then he fucking killed us both.
Yeah.